Welcome, everyone. I'm Piyush Tantia. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Ideas 42. And on behalf of Ideas 42, I'd really like to welcome Todd Rogers and thank him for being here and talking to us. Todd is an old friend. He was involved with building Ideas 42 right from the beginning through his days at the Analyst Institute, being a applied behavioral practitioner, much like us, and then going back to academia. So he's now a professor at Harvard, but remains a scientific advisor for Ideas 42. Yeah, so today he's going to be sharing insights from his new book, Writing for Busy Readers. It goes through 6 key principles and all the underlying psychology research for how to write well to get people's attention and help them respond more easily. So with that, let's kick it off. Todd is going to walk through a couple of the principles from the book, and then we'll jump into a Q&A conversation. Thank you all for submitting questions. I'll be asking a few of those as well. So that, Todd, over to you.
All right. Thank you. First, confirming you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for hosting this, Piyush. And I should have confirmed here, you can see the slide. Okay, good. Yeah, really happy to share this work. This is work with Jessica Lasky-Fink, my co-author on this book called Writing for Busy Readers, which came out last week. And the backstory is after grad school, I went and started a research institute called the Analyst Institute in DC, where we translated behavioral science insights into political communications, how to communicate with busy voters on things like persuasion, fundraising, volunteer recruitment, get out the vote. And then returned to academia and shifted to how do we mobilize and empower families to support kids outside of school. And so in the process, started a company called Everyday Labs that delivers millions of communications to families. We've done dozens of randomized experiments to evaluate different components and modalities and timing of how do we communicate to busy families to support student success. And then during the pandemic, worked with leaders in all sorts of organizations, especially government and nonprofit leaders, on how do we communicate with our many stakeholders about these important things related to the pandemic. And Jessica and I discovered that it turns out there's only a small number of principles that help us clarify, like, well, so how do we write so busy people read and respond? And for those of you coming from government, one way that I think about this is there was the Plain Writing Act in 2010 in the US. There's similar acts all around the world for the last 20 or 30 years that basically just dictate that government communications to the public needs to be written plainly. Now, some of those elements are clear how you write plainly. Other elements are underspecified. And the way Jessica and I think about this is that we're building on that, clarifying exactly how do we write so busy people who skim will successfully get the key information we want and respond when we want them to. Okay, orienting, it is now 1:38 Eastern. I think we're gonna be less than 15 or 20 minutes now, and then Piyush and I will talk about the work. But to start, I would normally just have, if we were all together, you'd raise your hand and I'd say, have you ever received a text message where you looked at it and you're like, I can't deal with that right now? Everyone would say yes. I'd then say, keep your hand up if you have ever not returned to it. And everyone's hand would stay up, because this is a common experience where we are overloaded with information. Even the smallest, shortest mode of communication we have, we still don't read and respond to as one might think. We do the same activity with email, and that would not be that would also not be pretty. I don't want you to enter this in the chat, because 20% of you are going to say the answer is 0, and it's going to make the rest of us feel bad. But I would ask, how many emails and documents are in your inbox right now awaiting response that previously decided you'll deal with later? Right. And so 20% are going to say 0. We'd all say, congratulations, you manage your life better than the rest of us. But most of us, the answer is an embarrassingly large number. So then I would say, what about these emails? And I want you to enter this in the chat. What about these emails made them get postponed while others were dealt with? So you look at them quickly and you're like, I can't deal with that now. I'll deal with it later. What are the attributes of those messages that make you decide I'm gonna deal with them later? So I don't know if the chat is on. If it is, enter it in the chat. Good. Okay, I'm starting to see it. Okay, so I see length. They're asking for too much. It's too long. These are all great. Complexity. I just want to flag that one. That's also a good one, which is, I think I know what I'm supposed to do, but there's a lot of steps required. I may need to coordinate with other people. Too much to read. Hard to pull out what the action is. It could be, there's a question in here. Somewhere in the third paragraph buried, there's a question mark. I can't find it. Unclear what whether it's a priority. Not clear what the ask is. These are awesome. These are good. Angry making. Okay, that's not where I'm good to be self-aware. That's not the focus of this work, but way too many words. Okay, these are awesome. You know exactly where we're going. So Jessica and I have worked with lots of organizations and people, individuals doing this kind of work, and they'll say things exactly like what you said. Read the ones I can probably delete or deal with quickly. So that is the easy ones. Quickly review and leave complex and extensive responses for last. I think that's interesting because complex and extensive responses, often after a quick review where we're scanning, we have to make an inference of how hard is this going to be to deal with. And we're not always right. Sometimes they look at it like, that's going to require a long time. Then eventually you get into it and you're like, it was a yes, no question that I could have answered. I just didn't. And I didn't do it in time. I scan everything, check the simple and quick messages first, and read the long and complicated ones last. Right. Again, we make inferences. One obvious one is how long it is. But then the complexity, we make an inference just from a scan of how difficult this is going to be to deal with. Jessica and I started this work about how do we help organizational leaders or anyone write so busy people read and respond to what we write. This is how do we help writers achieve their goals? In the process, you don't have to think hard to realize it's also just much kinder to our readers to write in this way. That is, if I send Piyush a message that was going to take 4 minutes for him to figure out and understand and respond, and instead I structure it so it's easy for him to figure out, easier to dive in and pop out, and it's well navigable, and it takes him 1 minute, I saved him 3 minutes. The original version was just unkind. It wasted his time. It didn't respect his time. And additionally, it's also inequitable to communicate in a lot of the ways that we currently communicate. So the median US adult, the 50th percentile, reads at about the 8th grade reading or 9th grade reading level. That means 50% of US adults read at a 9th grade or lower reading level. 20% read at a 5th grade reading level. When we write in these really convoluted or even just what we think are beautiful sentences, they're often just inaccessible to a very large fraction of people. So it's our goal, our superordinate goal is to help writers be more effective. How do you achieve your goals? In the process, it's also just kinder to readers and it's more inclusive. One person actually wrote, lengthy or disorganized writing is disrespectful of the reader. I just want to sit with that for a second. It is not even just about effectiveness. It's just not respectful to write in a way that demands more cognitive energy and time from your reader than was necessary. The book is really about the 6 principles for how do we write so it's easy for readers. We're going to talk about 2 of them, just 2 of them. The first, less is more. Everyday Labs, an organization that I spun out of my research lab to scale up proven absenteeism reduction interventions. And so it now sends millions of communications. Ideas 42 has been instrumental in helping to build it out. It works with many of the largest school districts in the US, reducing chronic absenteeism consistently by 10 to 15%. The thing that we're going to focus on here is it also is a hub for absenteeism data around the US. And so during the pandemic, I moderated a panel with the leaders of Broward County Public Schools and Dallas Independent School District about what are we seeing during this remote schooling environment about attendance. Their marketing team wrote this. I should say I'm chief scientist for them. So like when I recommended that we delete all the middle words, they were helpful and compliant. And we deleted all the middle words. Instead of describing why attendance is important, we just said, it's about closing this attendance gap. Here's who's there. The shorter one deleted everything and just said title and here's who's there. 200 people read it. And I asked them, which of these do you think will get more respondents to register? We had something like 3,000 or 4,000 registrants. This is a hot topic and Everyday Labs is well situated to talk about it. 93% of people, almost everybody thinks the longer one is going to be better. This is a consistent pattern. We run an A/B test, a randomized experiment. 3 times as many people sign up with a shorter one. We see this across lots of experiments. I'm just going to rip off a couple. With a grad student, we scraped all the email addresses of elected school board members. I send them during the pandemic an email saying, hey, I'm a professor. You're doing important work. I'm really grateful. I'm sure the families are grateful. I know you're busy. You're balancing competing interests. It's really hard work. Will you please fill out my survey? You can see we do a different condition to these elected school board members, and we just delete all the middle, you're important, great, we appreciate, gratitude. Of course, we want to be grateful and express our gratitude, but we're also burdening them with a lot of extra sentences. People read it. Almost everybody thinks the longer one is going to get more survey responses. We double survey responses when we make it shorter, despite most people thinking that the longer one is going to be better. We've done lots of these with text message, with email, with forms. I did one with the Democratic, one of the large national political parties. Piyush, strike that from the recording, please. With a large, they have 700, more than 600,000 donors or potential donors on their email list. And they write this really insanely formatted message. And they say, well, what experiment should we run to test how we would increase donation? I say, the first one, I chose to delete the middle section. The second one, I chose it. Here, I was just like, arbitrarily, you delete every other paragraph. So it does, like, just without any judgment, just delete every other paragraph and we'll run an experiment. We get people to read both. They think that the arbitrarily concise one is incoherent because we've just deleted every other paragraph, yet increases donation by 16%. So there are 3 kinds of less is more. The first, Strunk and White wrote a book called The Elements of Style, and omit needless words. That's obvious, cheap, and costless. It's obvious now. When they were articulating it, it was great. It was novel. Omit needless words. Yes, it's cheap and free, and you should do it. The second is omit only kind of useful ideas. And this is a harder one. It means even if we think these details are helpful, we just need to know there's a trade-off. The more you add, the more likely it is that you're going to deter someone from reading the key information or engaging at all. So the first is omit needless words. Yes. Omit extra extraneous ideas that are kind of useful, but they're not central, because the more you add, the more less likely someone's going to read and respond. The third, which is we've done, there's lots of good evidence for it, but one of them is a really nice experiment that the Behavioral Scientist, the website and magazine, ran, where when you ask people to do multiple things versus just one thing, the more you ask people to do, the less likely they are to do any one of them. And so 3 kinds of less is more: fewer words, fewer ideas, fewer requests. I actually had an experience last week where I was dealing with an organization that I partner with. I was talking to their leader, and at the end of the meeting, I had 3 things I wanted to follow up with her about. And I wrote out my full response asking for these 3 follow-up items. And immediately I was like, oh, but only one of them is really important. So I deleted the other 2 because I was afraid I would distract her or derail her into those topics when the really important one was the important one. And the more I add, the less likely it is I'm going to get a response to any one of the items. Less is more. The second is design for navigation. We're only going to talk about after this one, we're going to wrap up, and we're going to it's a teaser for the other 4 principles, which we can talk about if you want. I'm also going to send a checklist out so that you can have a checklist of all 6. Also, feel free to check it out in the book. I'm also going to show you an AI tool that we've made that is really useful for this. The second is design for navigation, because everyone skims. If you take away anything, it's that no one is reading or writing closely, continuously, closely, and linearly. We want to make it easy for skimmers. I'm going to start by one illustration that I'm going to ask you to enter something in the chat. And then I'm going to show one of my favorite all-time studies, which was done at Ideas 42. Imagine as a parent on a Wednesday during the pandemic, your kids are nagging, you're stirring the pasta, it's the end of the day, and your kid hands you a form. we're gonna show you the form. It's ridiculous. It's a real printed letter that school districts sent home. And you're gonna get 8 seconds. This yellow bar is 8 seconds. It looks like a lot of time, it's not. I'm gonna ask you to skim with that 8 seconds. I'm gonna ask you to look at what we have. You have 8 seconds. It's pretty generous given the context. And report out in the chat what exactly you caught. What did you pull? What did you think is the most important thing? I know it's ridiculous. If you might want to laugh now because it's an insane task. It's a ridiculous letter that was really sent home. And the school district asked Jessica and me to help them edit it so that we can make it easier for busy readers. But here we go. I'm going 8 seconds, then enter the chat. I'm gonna count down from 3. 3, 2, 1. And then you're gonna enter in the chat. Okay, so enter in the chat what you pulled out. There's COVID in the school, COVID, there's actions being taken, what a close contact is, something about there's a closure, someone, how to know if you're a close contact, COVID exposure, someone has COVID, my kid has COVID, what close contact means 6 feet, school is closed, COVID is in our midst, school building, what the school is doing, and lots of great ones. Okay, these are good. I know it's ridiculous, but I'm going to show you, we're going to look at it now with a little more time. You're a school district, you're a school sending home this letter at the end of the day on a Wednesday. It seems to me, and it seemed to about 25% of you pulled this out. The most important piece of information is school is closed starting tomorrow for the next 2 days. And anyone who had the experience of bringing their kid into school, as if we weren't alienated and isolated enough, showing up and the doors are locked and you hustled to get out the door the next morning and you didn't even know the school was closed. And they tell you it was in the letter. This happened, and it particularly alienating. So Jessica and I talked to them and work with them on how do we rewrite this. And when we come up with, we're not allowed to delete anything because the lawyers say it has to look like this. So we think, well, maybe we can add structure to it so it's easy to skim. We can't cut anything. But so what we come up with is why don't we add structure and headings so it's easy for people to jump around. School's closed, there's some paragraph. How will you know if your kid is a close contact? Lots of paragraphs. I would have deleted, I would have cut them down a lot. What to do if your kid is sick, what the school's doing, and so on. Right? So much easier to jump up and down. And the way we think about it is sort of like a map metaphor. It's like format, like designing it for navigation so that people can jump out and then jump in if they want to dive deeper onto a topic. Because that's how we read. We're skimming and jumping around. This was the original. This is the design for navigation version. You can imagine, like you can see, just making it easy. We've done an experiment with an organization called the Journalist Resource, where it was a 6-paragraph newsletter, and we added headings every 2 paragraphs or not. And when you add the heading, you more than double the likelihood anyone was going to click on anything after the 2nd paragraph, because like it's just a wall of words otherwise. This is the study I was alluding to that will be familiar to Ideas 42. It's an incredible study that was done with the New York City Police Department and the court system in New York. This form is it's called a court summons. They give out about 320,000 of these a year. The point of the document is to tell the recipient, handed by an officer to an arrested person, that they need to show up to a specific court at a specific time on a specific day. That's the point of the document. And you could be forgiven for not knowing that's the point because it is not at all clear on this form. Half of people do not show up. And then they get what are called bench warrants issued, which leads to this escalation of contact with law enforcement. It's bad for everybody. Massively disproportionately hurts disadvantaged New Yorkers, whether it's low income or people of color. So Ideas 42 works with them, and I'm sorry to be like over explaining in front of about Ideas 42 what they did, but I love this one. I'm part of the Behavioral Science and Policy Association, and this won Paper of the Year by the Behavioral Science and Policy Association. They redesigned it as if they were going to help people skim it, as if the point was to make it easy for readers without going in, like reading very closely, to understand what the point is. Label it as a court appearance ticket, unambiguous what the point is. They put up top, and in a way that's hard to miss, show up to court on a specific date, here's the location. And what they find is that it leads to 25,000 fewer bench warrants being issued, a pretty dramatic reduction in failures to appear in court, and much surprising law enforcement and courts, which had interpreted failure to appear in court as an intentional act. It turns out that people are busy, and even this really important high consequence document, they're reading in a way that they don't pull all the details out. So the first two principles, less is more, fewer words, fewer ideas, fewer requests. The second is design for navigation, because everyone skims. There are six other principles, which I will send out over the checklist. I'll send a checklist out and at the end of this to illustrate. I did a talk a year or two ago, maybe 2 years ago, with the Harvard Kennedy School's exec ed program to alums. And they wrote this completely sensible marketing email. I gave them the checklist I'm about to give you, which are these 6 principles. No coaching. And they just rewrote it on their own. And they end up with something that looks like this, which we can unpack if you want. But they lower the reading level, they cut the words, they make it navigable, they make the action easier. And then they did an experiment with their 100,000 alums and doubled registrations for the event. So first, the book, I will send out if you want you can find the book anywhere books are sold. It makes a great Christmas present. And it's how you can get everyone else on your team to write for busy readers. But more importantly, here's the checklist. I'm going to send out the checklist right now. It's the 6 principles. And then I'm going to show you in one moment. Here's the checklist. It's the 6 principles. You can download on the website, use it however you want. And then I'm going to show you this AI tool where we tuned here comes right there. Here on this website, which I'm sending out over the chat, you can see I've pasted a sample email into this box. Now, what we did was we trained GPT-4 on the principles and then a bunch of pre-post message emails. This is tuned for email. That you can tune it for anything. Notices of funding opportunity, forms, reports, but we tuned it for email. We gave it the principles and then a bunch of pre-post. Then I'm going to show you 2 examples of how it edits. I love it as a teaching tool. This is a sample email that a friend forwarded me from their kid's school. It looks like, I'm sorry I was late. Does Shay want to do? It's anonymized, so it's not really Shay. Here's some details about the program, and does your student still want to do it? It's going to rewrite it so that it's easier for skimmers, easier for anybody who's played around with these things, it's going crazy with formatting right there. So this looks like it's translating that first paragraph into some bullets, and then bolding the most important question: is Shay still interested? We'll hit it again. So now it's unpacking. It's a lot of crazy formatting. You'd have to edit it. But you see here, unpack this whole paragraph and turn it into one question. All right. So now I'm going to show one more example. This is an email about what you can do during, like, hey, team, we need to do better in our meetings. So if we do better in the meetings, everyone will perform better. Before the meeting, do these things. During the meeting, do this. After the meeting, do this. Oh, and also during the meeting, do this. One of the principles is put similar ideas next to each other. So one thing we're going to watch, it's going to move this, and the things during the meeting should be merged. And then it says, if we do this, we'll be more effective. Yeah, crazy bolding. So now it's got the before the meeting. During the meeting, there are two things. One is express your perspective and feedback considerately, but also jot down notes and don't hesitate. There, it moved number 3, it moved back up, and then it summarized it. Here, it's not like ChatGPT where it summarizes. The point here is to keep the detail, though say it more concisely and make it skimmable. So if you just want to jump to one of these sections, it can do it. The big picture is, as I wrap up, and Piyush will go to you and I can have a discussion. The big picture takeaway of all this work that Jessica and I have done on this writing for busy readers is when we edit anything, a text message, an email, a Slack, a report, a web page, we should add a round of edit where we ask ourselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? Because when we make it easier for the reader, it's more effective, it's kinder, and it's more accessible. How do I make it easier for the reader? That's the big version, the like big takeaway. And the book and everything, all the other materials are, how do we do that? But the thing is, we need to add a round where we ask ourselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? It's more effective and it's kinder. Piyush and Ideas 42, thank you for hosting this. And I as you know, I love the research you guys do, and I'm happy to be associated.
Oh, thanks, Todd. For those of you who did start reading the book, you will have noticed that I think in the first or second page, Todd answers the question of, wow, if we're saying less is more, why did we write a whole book? So there is a lot in the book. I read it. I enjoyed it. I knew some of the psychology, but there was still a lot that I didn't know. So I encourage you to read it. There's a lot more detail in there. And the AI tool is nice, and it's probably good for helping you practice rather than a substitute for reading the book, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Yes, I mean, the goal is the goal. We want everyone, when you write, to go through an editing round where you ask yourself, how do I make it easier for the reader? And the book and the checklist and the AI tools are like paths to that end. And the book is obviously a much fuller explanation and with more detail and steps. Piyush, can I touch on the preempting that joke of why would you write a long book to tell people to write shorter emails? Is that when people read a book, they expect it to look like a book. And you need to write for what your audience is expecting. I have a student who works for the CIA and writes intelligence assessments. And intelligence assessments have to be 70 pages. They said, if you don't write it 70 pages, they're going to think you didn't do your job. Okay. It's got to look like it's got to look. So we're not going to get less than 70. We can make it navigable. We can add structure to it. We can make the sentences simpler. We can make the actions clear. We can use formatting to reinforce the main point and so on. But you need to conform to what your reader expects. And then within those constraints, try to make it easier for them.
Yeah. And I love that principle, actually, of making reading easy. That was one of my favorites of those. It reminded me of a friend I have who's worked in various UN agencies. And we would, sometimes I'd be looking over her shoulder. The emails these people were writing to each other, my God, they were really, really formal. And I asked her, wait, why are you writing like this? Like, no, but I have to. This is the organizational norm. If I don't do this, then people will feel insulted. So how do you get over that challenge? Like if you're in a context where there is a norm that goes against some of these principles, what do you do?
I want to step back first before stepping forward.
Yeah.
The back is one of the interesting things that we didn't really spend much time in the book contemplating is, as a leader or a manager, what can you do in addition to just writing more effectively? And I actually think that that's a whole nother, probably as powerful as anything that we've thought about, which is setting norms explicitly for this is how we write. And it's not about writing well. We all were taught how to write well. Writing effectively is different. but setting explicit norms up front. And actually, like when you're new to a team, how do we communicate? Like what channel, whether it's Slack, email, text, reports, does different information go through? We probably are much more likely to have those discussions than we are to talk about like, well, what are the norms of how we structure what we write? And that example that I showed from the school district, where we start with notice, school closed for the next 48 hours. That was the first line. It really was borrowing from the US Army has a regulation called that is commonly referred to as BLUF, bottom line up front.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a rule in the US Army and has spread to the other armed services that when you are writing, the first line is the bottom line. This is the main idea. And whether it's a general communicating to an enlisted person or an enlisted person communicating to a general, bottom line up front. Now that is awesome because it's more effective for everybody, but it's especially useful for lower status people because they're doubly burdened by, in addition to being lower status, having to do a lot more deferential extra words, handling the ambiguity of how we communicate. And by setting those norms, like they make it more effective for everybody, but they especially protect lower status writers in helping them abide by more effective communication. Yeah. That said, your question was about constraints you've got to operate within the norms of your organization. You could probably change them a little bit, but then within the norms, you can still make it easier or harder for the reader to figure out what the point is.
Yeah, that's so important about the manager setting these kind of norms. But I was thinking that the UN case, it's a very international organization. There must be so many people where English is not their first language. And to your earlier equity point, to have a norm that's highly technical, flowery language in internal communications is probably not the best. Yeah, some of the others, you flash the checklist quickly, but I love all of them using formatting, but not too much. Telling readers why they should care, and then making it easy to respond, which is so important. So lots of research here over the years. What are some of your favorite findings? Like what was most surprising?
Well, I was holding myself back to jump in before we moved on from make reading easy, which is one of the principles. Yeah. Make reading easy. Another one of the principles is make responding easy, which is for those of us who are behavioral scientists. I think a lot, if not the vast majority of what we do could fall into the sixth principle, which is like, if it's important for us, make it easy for them. And so reduce friction, pre-populate, reduce the number of steps, things like that. But the research that I personally loved learning about the most, and Piyush, we were talking the other day about how I actually I surprised myself in really enjoying learning reading these other papers in fields I'm not unfamiliar with. I really love the eye tracking research, where, and actually I was first directed to this by our mutual friend, mentor, Ideas 42 founder, Sendhil Monathan, where he said, I think there's a thing called a period pause effect. You should look that up. And I looked this thing up, and it's this effect where when you force people to read, and they don't really read that often closely, but when you do compel people to read in a lab and you're tracking their eyes and they read word, and then there's a period, they stop at the period and wait. And you guys should all test yourselves. It's so automatic, we don't even notice it. But you pause at the period, and then you basically synthesize, what did I just read? And if I don't fully get it, we go back and we regress. It's called regressing. And so we go back and reread. And what's cool is one of the principles for make reading easy is make it easy for people to read in the first pass, so they never have to go backwards. Because once you have just that as a heuristic, then it makes it a lot easier. It's not about grammatical completeness or correctness. It's about just simplicity. If you need to go back to figure out what the word is referring to, it may be grammatically correct. It's just hard. And then they either have to have a lot of working memory and it's taxing, or they have to just regress and keep going back. And so I love the period pause effect, which was just is both a metaphor and an actual fact. Yeah. that readers are synthesizing, and the easier you make it, even at that micro level of the short sentence that is straightforward, it's just a lot easier. And it turns out it becomes more effective because people don't like cognitively taxing tasks and they give up. The default behavior for readers is to stop reading. And so
Yeah. Yeah, or worse, pick up the wrong information, right? And do something else like go to school with your kid when you didn't need to, which
Yeah.
is very costly. Um, so as I was reading the book, I was resisting my own temptation towards overconfidence. Like, oh, I've been doing sales and this for 25 years. Is there going to be anything new? I think I write really good emails. Uh, what are the mistakes that even experienced people, experienced marketing professionals, sales professionals, those who do this for a living, what are the mistakes that even they make most commonly?
So sales, I think I could say one of the more common mistakes, I'm not sure it's just sales, but it's everyone writing anything, is I think that we rely on completeness of what we write rather than ease. And so to be concrete and metaphorical, that I think the audience will like. Don Norman wrote this book called The Design of Everyday Things. Thaler and Sunstein refer to it as an inspiration and nudge. And it basically is one of the foundational books in 1980 that leads to the user-centered design. And kind of the radical thesis is if you design a physical object or any kind of object, even a software object, and the user interacts with it and gives up because they can't figure out how it works, even if they only gave it 2 seconds, they just give up. It's always the designer's fault, that it's never the user's fault. And Jessica and I take that even more radical take and say, if you write something, even if it's all in there and it's complete, and the reader looks at it, thinks it's about something, disengages, and then doesn't get the key message, it is always the writer's fault. Because we can't pretend it's not true. The reader is busy and skimming. That is always the case. And so if we take onus as writers, it's always our fault if the key information didn't get through, even if they didn't even bother reading it. They didn't bother reading it because they didn't think they could pull the key information out quickly. And so I think that the mistake in some of this, some of this is like CYA kind of disclosure-y. Some of it is every idea is important. And so I can't prioritize whatever leads to it. I think the common orientation that we would advocate changing is the goal is not to be complete in what we communicate. The goal is to do the magic of an idea from my head being transformed into something, you looking at it, and the idea getting in your head. And the only metric we care about is whether it gets into your head, the essential idea.
Yeah. And there was a question from the audience from before about deliberate practice, which was a good question. How do you practice this enough that it becomes automatic and then you don't forget to do it, even if you're a professional? So any advice on that? I know the AI tool could be really helpful as feedback as you're practicing.
So 3 things. I hope I remember the third by the time we get to it. The first, there are important things we write where we ask other people, what do you think? Right. This actually, it turns out this is more common than I even thought. I was part of a discussion and study recently where it turns out people ask for feedback on writing more commonly than I would have thought. And that is usually because I know this is an important communication. And the feedback, it's unclear what feedback we're asking for. I think it's usually clarity and politics is usually what we're like, am I getting the politics right? I think maybe we add a dimension of like, could this be communicated in a way that's easier to read? And that makes us, as those giving feedback, like we should add that to our criteria, but also we should explicitly ask for it. That's the first. The second, building it in structurally to the editing process. Like I work with a government agency that we abandoned this idea because the governments are still figuring out how to deal with the LLMs, the large language models. But we talked about actually in the writing of these common forms, adding a step in the editing process where it's like, okay, now we've done it. The lawyers have reviewed, we edited, whatever. Let's run it through a trained LLM that is specifically trained on the principles and also some pre-post examples of the kind of writing we're talking about in this category. And then it'll just be suggestions, right? You just actually build it mechanically in. And the third is, you say deliberate practice. The third is some version of actually taking the research seriously and like trying the tool and reading the book and talking with people, like being deliberate about like, this is actually something we need to have discussions about, because it's even more than the last, it's like further along than the last mile. It's the last centimeter. It's like the last edit of the last of everything is complete. Well, let's step back. Like, is it easy? Can we make it easier for the reader because it's more effective and it's kinder?
Yeah, I mean that last centimeter, so many of our projects, you're trying to get somebody to do something, whether we're getting a funder to fund us or a partner to implement their idea, or even someone to take up a benefit or something like that. We're often fixing these types of writing pieces.
I mean, imagine grants. Like you've been on both sides, Piyush, where you've written grants and you've reviewed grants. And now neither of us has ever skimmed a grant we were asked to review. This is not something either of us would have ever done. Never. But I think a lot of other people have.
Yeah.
Like and the incredible labor that goes into possibly every sentence. And some of the, like, how do we make it easier to read? Imagine adding structure. Not hard to add headings so you can navigate it.
Yeah.
Or like, what do I think the most important idea is? How do we make sure that that is clear from the very beginning? Or whatever, you can work backwards from that. But that's, I think grants, because a lot of people can relate to that in the nonprofit and Ideas 42 world, that we like incredibly labor over every part of it. But and you don't want to dream that, or nightmare that the reviewer themselves are busy. There's evidence that amicus briefs in the Supreme Court that are shorter are more likely to get cited, because I mean, I don't know, like I've talked anonymously to people who clerked in the courts. Like, they have a stack of briefs. Which one do you think they start with?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I liked a lot that the audience had submitted is, okay, these days there's a lot of audio, there's a lot of video used in communication. I mean, we're doing a webinar right now that's live. Do you think a lot of these same principles from research apply to other media as well? It's not have to be written. I mean, obviously formatting gets translated in a different way, but what about the other principles?
I did a webinar yesterday for journalists on writing for busy readers, because we've done a lot of research now with they're not newspapers, the online news sources like Washington Post and Upworthy, where we do A/B tests on headlines, and it unsurprisingly completely in line with everything we're saying. The simpler the headline, the more likely, within, same story, different headlines to test, the simpler the headline, the more likely to someone clicks on it. Even for the Washington Post, which is pretty, upmarket, and then also Upworthy, which is more general. But across modalities, in that webinar yesterday, I ran a study with them beforehand, and I said, "Hey, you're journalists." At the end of the survey, I'm like, "Hey," and half of them I say, "Would you like to read a 3-minute story about Vladimir Putin?" The other half I say, "Would you like to read a 13-minute story about Vladimir Putin?" Consistent with everything else Jessica and I have ever done, even journalists, more than twice as likely to say, "I'll read the 3-minute story than the 13-minute story." Right. So like, that's one version of like everyone's busy. And Jessica and I ran a study on this, which is the most obvious study. It doesn't even make it into the book. That where we at the end of a study, we're like, "Hey, would you like to watch this 1-minute video or this 7-minute video?" And nobody goes to the 7-minute video. Everybody goes to the 1 minute. And that's like, some kind of multimedia visual. That's like demand on the sort of initial step. The thing that is different, so when it's non-synchronous, non-in-person, digitally mediated, live, you can still disengage. And so it's complicated. That's a little bit like giving up on the reading. Like, some people, probably 2 people, not many, at some point during this, check their email. And they're like, yeah, they sort of like, I lost their attention when we were having our conversation. We lost their attention. The in person, it feels like a different thing. In person, I have now the first order problem in writing is that the most common response is to not read at all, is to not engage. Then once they engage, how do you make it easy before they give up? And then if you're asking for an action, how do you make that? So you can think of it as a 3-step thing. In person, I've captured you. So I have the time until we decide it's over. You could still mind wander. And so that sort of resembles disengaging, but like you're still kind of here. And so I could speak pretty confidently about writing, the way people read in the wild of written words. I can also say confidently that when you are offering people to look at some kind of multimedia thing, the longer it is, the less interested they are. But then conditional on them beginning, I think it's then you bring in all the other elements of narrative and persuasion and stimulation and whatever else that is. It's like kind of a different game. I'm intrigued by it, but we're pretty silent on that.
Right. By the way, I got my emergency alert.
Oh, I did not.
A couple of minutes ago. So I think different people are getting it at different times, but I got it a couple of minutes early. That's at 2:20. So it might be coming for others if it hasn't already, as we're talking.
Mine has not come. So.
Right. Yeah, it has no instructions, obviously, for what to do if you don't receive it, because I received it. Yeah. Another question that I thought was intriguing is there's someone in the audience works with dealing with complaints from customers. So I was thinking, oh, that's an interesting contextual feature. What if you're writing for someone who's not only busy, but also, likely to be angry or annoyed with you or your company?
That's a really nice question, because there also are attributions that people will make, and you have to navigate those, right? What do people expect? If you write something well structured, looks respectful. 2 sentences may look disrespectful. And so what is the thing you're trying to convey? You probably want a lot of content in that case. And assuming you are benevolently intentioned to actually aim to be understood and not trying to obfuscate, then you want it to be navigable and you want it to be easy to read and not sound like legalese jargon. And if there is something that they may take, an action they may take, you want that to be clear. If you want to return it or exchange it, you want to make it as easy as possible. All those things apply. That said, there's I think I might even have it. I might even have it here. Behavioral science. We love our New Yorker comics. There's one of, if you give me, oh man, I'm gonna get it. But there's a great one where they have the devil talking to one of his underlings, and he's like, here it is, hard to read. Unclear writing. I couldn't be more proud. There it is. The language in this contract is wordy and indirect and uses unnecessary technical words and phrases. I'm very impressed. I mean, that in the book we talk about this, where we are talking to you assuming you are trying to be clear and you are trying to help readers. And some people are in the business of trying to obscure things and make it hard for readers. One, as a reader, we should be put on alert that when that's happening, they're trying to hide something. But if you're responding to a complaint, you don't want to make it hard to read, but you probably want it to be hefty, and you want to make sure that it's easy for them that you make it easy for them in ways that feel respectful. But you're muted, Piyush. There's a woman, Jennifer Palka, who wrote a book called Recode America that I really like. And in it, she was the founder of Code for America, and then was the first chief digital officer of the US. And she has this phrase that complexity favors the privileged and sophisticated. And I know that is not I think of that as part of this whole system of like, how do we make it easy for readers? And it's not just that it's easy or kind, it's that it specifically disadvantages the least sophisticated when we make things difficult.
Yeah. Say more about hefty in the complaint scenario. Like, why does your intuition say hefty?
I like it's gonna. It is an intuition. I have no empirical grounding in it, but I
Yeah,
suspect that if someone is complaining to you, they want to be heard and they want to be responded to in a way that they think signals that you're taking them seriously.
yeah,
And one way, and these are just attributions. It may or may not be like reality, but I suspect that there is an attribution that if it's terse, terse is too judgmental. If it's concise, it will feel like effort was not put into it. Whereas if it's hefty, it will feel like there was effort put in, and that will get conflated with respect
right.
and being heard. And we should, like, you should respond to them with respect and being heard, and make it easy for them. And that the way I would do that is I would add structure and I would make it clear what, if there's actions they can take, what they need to do. But in that context, just like writing a book, just like writing a CIA intelligence assessment, I don't think conciseness is but that's an intuition. I don't know what the norms are.
Yeah, no, I share it. I think that makes sense. Well, here's an interesting question from audience. I don't know if you know if there's similar research done. Do these principles apply in other languages than English? Is there any difference if you're using a different language?
So this is one way that Jessica and I, we are, and you having read the book, and those of you who will, we are very clear to not give prescriptive advice on how you should be doing this. We are instead saying, look, people are busy, people skim. And that means the easier we make it to read, the less likely they are to be deterred. The easier it is to navigate, the more likely it is that they will navigate and find the things they value, and so on. But depending on modality, depending on norms, depending on timing, depending on relationship, those things are all going to, like, how that gets operationalized is going to vary. The same is true across cultural context, within organizations, across nations, across languages. The basic fact remains that everyone is busy and everyone is skimming. How we respond to that and translate it into context is, I mean, I know that everyone in the audience has not been around for you and I talking for 15 years, but this is like, yes, the principle is right, but the real work is translating it into context.
Yeah.
And that I think is true here. Like there, if we had more time, I would talk about the incredible Israeli study where they put calorie labels on food, and like in the US, there's been a conclusion that seems to have been premature. The calorie labels don't affect what foods people choose. But the way it normally is operationalized is that goes like the calorie label goes to the right. I don't know how I'm being seen, but to the right of the words. And people read in English left to right. And so they do a study like, what if we put it to the left? So they encounter it first in the way they read before they move on to the next item, seem to have a reasonable size effect. Then in Hebrew, they read right to left, not left to right. And so if it's really not about being on the left-hand side, but being where the eye looks first, they replicated in Israel in Hebrew, where if you put it on the right, it changes behavior. But if you put it on the left, it has no effect, because like the way people are reading is different. But that said, you want to put it where people are going to attend to it and notice it.
Super interesting. Well, Todd, we're just about at time. Anthony, I think you're going to put up a final plug for the book.
Sure. Thank you. And in addition to the book, the final plug will be repeating ad nauseum, as said before. Oh, that's nice. I like that. Thank you for putting that one up. The takeaway is we should add a round to our editing where we ask ourselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? Because when we make it easier for the reader, they reward us with being more likely to read and respond to what we write. It's also kinder and more accessible. So how do we make it easier for the reader? And that's it at every level. And for those of you in the audience, something that we're sort of pushing, or I would like to really get into, is how we integrate it into the teaching of writing, both in high school and college. Because the writing in the real world, it turns out, is writing to busy people, not writing beautiful essays.
And all of you busy people, thank you so much for coming to this. You will be getting a follow-up email from the master himself, from Todd, and you will get one from us with the session recording so that you can review it later if you want or share it. Please feel free to send us questions, look up more seminars coming from us. And Todd, thank you very much for being here. It was really fun.
Thank you, Piyush. Thanks, Ideas 42, and everyone who was in attendance.